Thanks everybody on the first panel for really fascinating insights. We're going to crack on as we're getting a little behind on the session. And I'd like to introduce first Kay Watson from the Serpentine. Kay, far away.
Shall I stand?
Yeah, please do.
Okay,
Yeah.
My slides are just aesthetic. They're not really for me to talk to. My name's Kay. I'm Head of Arts Technologies at Serpentine. I've been there for 8 years, leading the Art and Tech programme at the Serpentine. So for those of you who don't know, and maybe people do, we're a public art gallery and charity that's been presenting contemporary art since 1970. And the work that we do focuses on 3 strands predominantly, especially in terms of our research-focused work, which is ecology, technology, and community. We obviously do other things as well. So Serpentine Arts Technologies is the program that I'm leading and explores the impact of technology through art, research, and experimental projects, some of which you will be able to see here. And it supports artists to produce projects that use advanced technologies. We also, a key other element to our program, brings together people working in art, tech, law, policy, and academia to share knowledge and develop new ideas about technology and society. And some of the areas of our focus are blockchain, AI, and video games. And there's a few other things in between. We have developed, so I'm really going to focus really on the kind of where I'm coming from in this situation when we're talking about curating, especially collecting in some shape or form. So we have developed 2 main capabilities. On the one hand, commissioning and production is very core, and on the other is R&D and prototyping. So when I'm talking about, I'm glad that works. When we're talking commissioning and production, we initiate and support artists in developing ambitious projects. So key here is the way we work, and there's been a lot of discussion about process actually in the last panel, which I think is especially important. We build teams around projects and we lead on workflows and pipelines, which is quite unusual for a contemporary art gallery to do. Most recent of which is not an AI project, is the development of an AI game. An AI game? It's a video game. Exhibition and Web3 tokens, otherwise known as NFTs, registered on the Tezos blockchain with the Brazilian artists. Shout out to Tezos at the back there. With the Brazilian artist, Gabriel Massan, that launched on Steam and in the gallery. And obviously we've done, I'm showing a selection of these here. We've worked with a lot of artists on the development of AI-focused projects in the past, some of which you'll see, which is, oh, you might have to go back. I hadn't thought of that. We worked with Ian Cheng on the birth of the artificial life form Bob, Jano Sitella on a project called eMagma, Hito Steyl on a project called Actual Reality OS. We've worked with Demystification, we've worked with Rafik Anadol and Pierre Huyghe. I don't have time to go into what all of those projects were. Our next project, which I think is especially relevant to this conversation, is a collaboration. It's a collaborative project, an exhibition with Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. You mentioned Holly Plus before. It's kind of the evolution of that Holly Plus project. So we're working on the development of a choral AI. We're building that data set by traveling across the UK, recording UK choirs, amateur choirs and professional choirs. We'll be singing new songs. This is a songbook developed by Holly and Matt to train a model or a set of models, all to be decided. And the exhibition is conceived of as a kind of embodied understanding of an AI model in the form of the exhibition. So experiencing the training data, new compositions, then there'll be participatory elements. That's all I can kind of say at the moment, in an environment that's been designed by the designers Sub. But we're also using this project as a way to test out something called a data trust. And that kind of leads me to the second part of what we do, which is R&D and prototyping. It's very core. It's the foundation of our department that develops strategy. We collaborate with policy, academic actors, industry actors. And what this represents is both kind of thought leadership, a word that makes me do this because it's a bit cringy. Convening and building and testing prototype projects that focus on the impact of technology on art, on culture and society. This manifests in a number of different ways now. It's centered around a project of ours called Future Art Ecosystems. It's a project that we describe as building 21st century cultural infrastructure, that is the systems that support the production, distribution, financialization of art and advanced technologies as a whole, while also responding to a broader societal agenda. And this project links to a series of labs. We have a legal lab, which in this context is extremely important, creative AI lab, a synthetic ecologies lab, a blockchain lab that also focuses on DAOs. In terms of our work with AI in this area, we launched a report, what we would call a strategic briefing in March, called Future Ecosystems 4, Art and Public AI. And that report zooms in on the emerging landscape of AI tech as they impact the creative economy and also society at large. Through this research process, we talked to a lot of people from across art, tech, industry, and governmental policy. And the publication maps the risks and opportunities in building and integrating AI systems and various elements associated within the cultural domain. One of the things I think is important to say is what we try and do, aside from mapping the kind of landscape as it relates to culture, is to really interrogate, to really say that AI is a set of technologies, it's a stack, it's not just a behemoth. We're talking about the relationship between sets of technologies, we're talking about data sets, we're also talking about natural resources and computation and how all of those things intersect with each other. But also the publicness associated with these areas. And I think what's interesting about Botto project is this element of public and non-public. And we look at this as a sort of looking between thickness and thinness of publicness. It's a tricky thing it's obviously a really tricky thing to describe, but we try. So that has emerged out of our creative AI lab, which has been a space for long-term research by our department and King's College that has been led by Ava Jaeger and Mercedes Bunn since 2019. We're really looking at the back end, so the process of artistic production when it comes to working with AI systems. And the lab launched the Creative AI database in 2020, which is this index of which Luba contributed to in the first iteration of tools and resources, etc. So that is to say, we're very invested in and I've had a very holistic understanding of the impact and role of AI on art and culture. I think we might get to this, but what's also important is the kind of, when we're talking about it from a curatorial or institutional perspective, are the kind of skills we're talking about here, which are very varied. As I was saying before, I spend, I would say, 50% of my time working on legal things and contracting, amongst many other things. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll start discussing the rest of that stuff. So thank you for having me. Just loads of my slides.
Oh, sorry?
You just call them.
Exactly. Good evening, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. My name is Stefanie. I work for Taex. We're very happy to power this event together with Digital Art Week. Thank you, Verse. It's been already amazing, so interesting, so very happy to proceed further. No clue how to switch on the the presentation. Should I just put? He's going to put it on. He's going to put it on? Amazing. Oops. I have exciting news. I have 3 slides. So Taex, so we are a digital art platform hosting events all over the world. We showcase, co-produce, sell digital art. I want to put the spotlight on one particular event we're doing now, which is in Venice. For the whole duration of the Venice Biennale, we've taken over a building which we've called Scoletta dell'Arte, where we were showing the processes of digital art making, but of course the topic of the evening, AI. We have 3 artists there that work with AI, and one of them that I want to put in the spotlight is the female artist Funa Ye. The other 2 artists are Italian, Andrea Meragalli and Francesco Disa, who's actually just written a book, which I'm happy to tell about more. So Funa Ye is an AI artist. This is a digital portrait of the Shamate, which is subculture in China, and they live in rural areas, and then so they're a bit excluded, and they're very recognizable and distinguished because they have amazing haircuts, very colorful. Their hairstyle is looks a bit like the punk hairstyle, but she used GAN, which Arthur Miller has explained before in his presentation, which is a generative adversarial network, which she fed the machine with the artificial intelligence with photos from the internet taken from the shamanic community, the selfies that they post online. And so she's created this homage to them and by creating actually fake photography with GAN. So yeah, that's, please come visit us in Venice. As I promised, 3 slides, so looking forward to the panel.
That's I wasn't quite ready.
Want to do any slides?
Let's see how we're going to
Okay.
do I need to press anything on this? Okay. The first things I was going to say were on the screen. So, hi everyone. I'll try and keep this really quick as well, so we can go straight to a maybe longer Q&A. I've got some notes here, but I'll skip quite a lot of it. I guess I'm Sam Mercer. I'm from the Photographers Gallery, which is an institution that is 53 years old this year. And I work on a digital program which began in 2012. It's a kind of research commissioning program which focuses on computational, social, ecological, aesthetic and political issues arising from the photographic image in network culture. The first few years really focused on the networked image, and we presented things like this, which was an exhibition of internet cats. We did GIF shows, really thinking about this kind of shift to how a kind of visual culture of the web wasn't necessarily being kind of translated or presented within specifically photographic institutions, and trying to kind of bridge a gap to almost challenge a 20th century model of institution about what is acceptable to show within there. Also in 2012, and in relation to all of this, was the ImageNet Visual Recognition Challenge. And none of us, I mean, at least in the Photographers Gallery, none of us knew what that was at the time. And it only actually began to kind of seep into what we were doing in 2016, when we began to do quite a lot of other work. We had a PhD, collaborative PhD working with us called Nicolas Maleve. We started to work with Luba on events around creative AI. We started a publication called, an online publication called Unthinking Photography. And we invited an artist to present on this screen an artist called Sebastian Schmieg. And he'd produced a work in 2011 called Search by Image, in which he'd present an image. In the case of the one we showed, we started with this image, which is Lena, which is a very famous image within kind of image compression and computer science labs. I won't go into the story now, but in the work, he takes the image, puts it into Google Images, and it comes up with the most similar image, and he creates a program which recursively goes through that. This is meant to be a GIF, it's not working, but it was a live program, so every day it would start from just one image and do this until the end of the day, where there'd be like 7,000 images. And it takes you on these kind of wild journeys of like what Google Images thinks is the most similar thing. This is what we invited him to do, and he did do this. But he said to us, and I'm just going to read a small quote, Lena represents a standard reference image in itself, the ideal against which algorithms are tested. However, modern computer vision applications have moved beyond such a clear reference. With big data and neural networks, algorithmic systems are now evaluated by their ability to understand abstract concepts. So the shift from single instance to concept allows for a computational system that have a seemingly better understanding of our culture. However, the algorithms and automation permeating almost every aspect of our daily lives, the data sets on which automatic decision-making systems are based, unfold with an uncanny efficacy while being rather undiscussed and invisible. So this was back in 2016, and he kind of proposed something that in some ways feels kind of a bit unethical, but he was basically trying to say, let's look at how the computer science labs were actually producing things and see about how we can do that, how we can make sense of that. So he proposed this project which was called Decision Space, and it was a small piece of JavaScript that went onto the Photographer's Gallery website on every image. So as people kind of went around, it would categorize all the images that we had on the website, whether it was a marketing image or a work, but it categorized them with these 4 terms: problem, solution, past, and future, which are actually quite ambiguous terms. You can't they don't necessarily have specific vision to them, and that was an intentional choice. But the aim was to try and build a data set based on images from the Photographer's Gallery's 50-year archive to try and think specifically also with the audience. And the reason for that was also to think about who's actually being involved. And maybe this is the kind of point that we come from at the Photographer's Gallery, which is when we talk about AI, maybe similar to Kay and Bartek, we talk about these kind of massive systems, but actually what we really mean is a group of distributed, sometimes unpaid, sometimes low paid, sometimes voluntary workers who are actually performing quite a lot of tasks to produce the meaning of these data sets. That's something photography, I'll skip that. This is Luba performing in 2017 at an event. This is the last thing I'll talk about. This is 2019. And again, we were really interested in ImageNet as this, the way we describe it is the most important cultural image, the most important image archive that could maybe exist in the 21st century in terms of how much influence it's had on how we see the world today. The problem with all these image data sets is that no one really looks at the images. They get collated, they get analysed, they get tested, but no one's actually looked at 14 million images in one go, let alone the institution, which is much more interested in looking at an individual image than an entire data set. So the proposal for this was to show over a 2-month period every image from the data set, which was a kind of like gruesome. This is the cute part, but it's actually a really gruesome part when you get to things like skin conditions or like some of the more kind of misogynistic or like racist imagery that actually exists within there. But I think that was the point. No one's looked at, this is 2019, no one had looked at really what these images were doing. And we felt as a cultural institution it was kind of our role to maybe begin, again, with an audience to think through what that was. Let me just check. That was part of a project called Dataset Match, which was all around image data sets. And one of the things that comes out of that is this book that I've got in my hand, which is called A Cat, a Dog and a Microwave. And these are some other commissions from there. This is a birthday party we held for the 10th birthday of ImageNet with its founder, Fei-Fei Li. These are some projects we did since. This is a project about machine and human collaboration to produce small fictions. This is the book. And then this is an open call we have right now for just to kind of say that we're still kind of thinking about this, we're still looking into it, and this is a open call that's on for the next 3 weeks to look to commission a new work around generative AI and its histories. But that's it. So I rushed that.
Thank you very much, Kay, Stefanie, and Sam. I'd like to ask the audience a couple of questions before we move into general discussion. How many people here collect or have collected AI art? And how many of you actively curate AI art? Extremely interesting. Because what we wanted to talk about tonight is not just the curating and collecting of art, but the ownership of AI art. Because as the panelists have touched on, both sets of panelists, one of the critical things going forward is what is the future of the data set and who owns it? Where does the power lie? One of the challenges we face at the Art Newspaper, where I look after the technology side of the publication as well as the general management of the editing side, is how do we help our readers deal with what is one of the great existential questions of our lives today, which is how do I interact with AI? And one of the burning questions is who controls access to the best tools? So how can an artist engage? How can an artistic institution engage when so many, ultimately the data sets are vested in large corporations? So what I'd like to do is to open up to the panel, first of all, to discuss how curating art in AI is different to other forms of curation. And then moving on to that, how that affects how people might collect it. So Kay, if I could go to you first, this interesting question of what is different about curating AI art, including in an institution like AI art in Serpentine to other, what have you learned from your move into AI art curation?
I mean, I would not necessarily look at AI art differently to working with other advanced technologies. There are obviously specific things to it, but if I were to think more generally than that, I think what's really, it depends on the kinds of things that you focus on. For us and for me, what is particularly important is our role in the production of these works in order for us to understand what is happening and how these works are developing. So as an institution, we don't just say, we don't commission you and then we present it. We're not just a presenting institution. The idea is that we have inherent knowledge when it comes to how AI systems are developed and disseminated and all these kinds of things. And we also have some interesting legal knowledge that we're developing. And so for us, it's about a collaboration. That's kind of a thing that's been talked about a lot anyway. It's really not just about human and machine collaboration. It's really, I would argue that quite a lot of art, particularly when it comes to advanced technologies, is collaborative and it involves a lot of people and a lot of different skill sets. And so there is that kind of process element and how, if I talk institutionally about how institutions support that and support artists to do that, requires a certain skill set to be able to do it. That said, I have sort of said that we don't just present, but with the presentation of these kinds of works, there is also another kind of skill set required. I hope that's helpful as an answer.
No, certainly.
Because it's quite a big question.
Yes, no, but it takes you to the point that one of the interesting things about your recent Refik Anadol show is that he made a point of explaining the process.
Yeah.
Because AI is an acronym to the general public. How do you make them less afraid, make them engage? First of all, it's the same as the recent raft of excellent publications of NFTs. Robert Alice on NFTs, on process was the key chapter. Make people engage with it. So again, with Refik, he had this amazing data screen so that people would understand how the data was collected, how it was classified, how it was processed, how you get to the end. And that goes to Arthur's point that ultimately art is a process. And so what I'd like to open up, maybe Sam, if you can address, what is it, and Stefanie, what is it about collecting AI art, that we can, how does it differ from other advanced digital art forms? And maybe you'd like to address that. In other words, how do you bring in a new community? Because I think there's an interesting point that people who are engaged with Botto in the early days, you mentioned from the financial community, were the London financial community was one of the first to engage with Botto. And I wondered if you could open up about how people have, perhaps you've seen different people come into the industry, as it were, through AI art.
Okay, yeah, so it's true that the Botto project, actually, I found out not through people that are in art, but people that bought the token, right?
Yes.
So me working in art, I found out not through people in art, which is really interesting. And I think that with Taex, we're really working all the time on bridging the communities that are from Web3 and NFT, which is actually a word that we don't even use when we talk about digital art, because unfortunately people, they always mix up all the terms. So there's a lot of education that's still needed. And when I tell to people, I used to work in art, now in digital art, NFTs. And they're so proud. They said the word, it's done, there they go. And I try to say, well, NFTs is on the blockchain. It's a way to sell digital art. It's a proof of ownership, transparency. But it's like you sell houses and people say, oh, you bought a contract. And I say, no, you didn't buy the contract. You bought the house. So it's a bit the same thing. And I think in general, what we try to do is to really put the accent on the art and not the technology. But also, but then when selling, it's part of what we do. We actually also love to showcase, as I said, with the show in Venice and participating in our art fairs. We will be in Art Basel. So for those who are coming, we'll be happy to see you there as well. And I think that I went to New York now recently, and I saw the Harold Cohen show. It was on till the 19th of May. I don't know, does anyone see the Harold Cohen? Yeah, it was brilliant, right? And it's so cool to see how they've curated it, and they really show, I mean, he's the pioneer, right? The first artificial intelligence in art making. And it's amazing to see how it's in the Whitney, and everyone can come and see the process, and it's very well curated because you see the projection on the wall of how the artificial intelligence is adding on. And so Harold Cohen was a very good painter, he's an established British painter, and he thought that actually to be able to understand painting even more, he had to put the code in a software, and then the machine could in the end even teach back to him, which was an interesting dialogue. And so in the end, you do have this result of a genius that is, and in the complementary of what we were talking about, actually, I also wanted to say that at one point he started with the abstract and then went to the figurative. And in the abstract, he was, so when the machines were starting to, like the plotters were starting to paint what the software had created. In the beginning, it was not ideal, so you had to paint. There were no colors, so you had to paint above the drawings that were made by the machines. And this is genius when you think about it. So I think when we're trying to sell or to explain this new ownership, you have to tell the story that goes with it of the technology, but also of the art and the depth of what the artist is trying to convey.
I feel like I want to slightly correct myself.
Okay.
Sure. By all means, Kate.
Yes, I think, when I'm saying I think that working with AI is the same with working with other advanced technologies, I'm talking at a very macro level about how we approach working with artists and working with the sector. Of course, working with AI is its own set of skill and knowledge and things like that. So just to correct that, because I don't want to be misunderstood.
So.
I think a couple of things that I'd want to add are everything that I just talked about in the presentation, which is kind of between around data sets is between 2016 and 2021. And it was a very interesting context to work in. Like everyone that was engaged in the programs was really engaged and interested. And there has been a shift in the last 2 years, maybe not specifically, but within the context of a photography institution and thinking about the role of AI, the mainstream conversation has actually shifted. And so the role of the approach to curating AI is actually quite different. It is still about trying to unpick and understand what these new technologies are, but it's also increasingly about trying to navigate the wider context and frameworks that photographers and maybe audiences are beginning to understand about what AI is, whether that's this kind of the understanding of image theft, or whether it's a more kind of ecological approach, which is something that I think is kind of the project we did following Dataset Match was a project around the ecological sides of specifically digital art and the effects that of an ever increasing mass of images that we're all feeling compelled to produce and work with. And it's quite hard to kind of think through how to navigate those systems. So that's something I'd say that the context is kind of the context and the ecological sides are the main approaches we're currently taking. The other thing that I would say, we had a conference at the gallery with the University of Westminster last week, and at the very end someone said something which is something I think we've been talking about at the gallery in this program, but also probably in a room like this, which is that within photo education, it feels quite limited. And there's people, I think you mentioned it, and some people at the conference were also talking about it, but like the conversations that are happening between the photography and the art world and the computer science world and the people that are producing data sets, people producing algorithmic systems, there needs to be like a much closer connection between what those are at an educational level and at an earlier stage. And I think that's something that we're beginning to try and think and address from like a program and a curatorial side.
Well, that brings us to an interesting point is, Kay, perhaps if I could start with you again. How do you think that curators in the way of art institutions should be planning to work with the data they have? How should they plan, in terms of data trust and other approach, how should they be planning to, as it were, introduce their data to this world in which so much of the information is controlled by large private corporations? How to engage? I think that
it's a big question, and there are lots of different answers to that.
Yeah.
Our approach generally is that we feel art as a sector has a very important role to play in relationship to tech, academia, policy, in how these things play out. We think it's a really vital site of experimentation, both in the way that artists work with the technologies and otherwise. We think that the way that we're thinking about ownership in the context of the work that we do is not really just about thinking about the ownership of art per se. We're looking really about how the context of art can actually reconfigure more generally how we think about what ownership means. And really, a lot of work we're doing is really trying to focus on this idea of stewardship. And so there's something to be said about cultural institutions as stewards of data sets and what that means and what role they will have to play going forward when it comes to conversations with tech companies or other areas, but also understanding that there is inherently more value in the collective or the bigger data set. Our understanding of data as it is, if we think about GDPR regulation, is that this is very much focused on the individual, and we're really, our sort of thinking and approach is really thinking about collective and collective bargaining. We don't know how that's going to work yet. I guess it's worth saying, I sort of mentioned the word data trust and then I didn't say anything about it,
sure.
Which is what we're doing with Holly and Matt is that, we're going around and building this choral data set. We have hired, we're a data trustee, which we like to say is the first data trustee in an art institution in the world. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But it's a nice thing to say. And we're working with the Centre for Data Futures, which at King's College, amongst lots of other people, we have a really wonderful relationship and partnership with an organisation called Radical Exchange on the development of a data trust, or thinking through what that model of data trust would be for the data that we are collecting that's going into the model that Holly and Matt will be using to make new compositions, but it's likely to be an open source model as well. That is a really intense process. If anyone knows anything about doing community governance, it's really intense. And the idea is this is a bottom-up structure. It's collectively decided by all of the choirs what the right approach will be. So we're looking at lots of different structures, and this is all work in progress. And it's worth saying, this is what Serpentine is doing. It's what Serpentine Arts Tech is doing. We are making this, and that's really important about what we do as a team, is that we build and we make these projects. And so obviously we're doing it, it's part of this year-long collaboration with Holly and Matt, and they've been wonderful in working together with us to really, to want to go down this road as an expansion of what she's done with Holly Plus and the DAO structure around that. So it's a work in progress. We don't know how it's going to work, but we think it's a really valuable, important thing to do. I don't know if that answered the actual question.
No, I mean it's an interesting one because we've got some examples from artists. So if we go to the case of Refik Anadol, who's built a large language model of his own, he's worked with Google for compute and with NVIDIA
Yep.
for help on that side. So if we go to institutions, Thomas Campbell in Hong Kong earlier this year was talking about the fact that institutions like his own in San Francisco need to be engaging with big tech to work out how to make the best use of their extraordinary data sets. And the question is how best, to go about it. And I mean, it's a fascinating challenge because, we've got lessons in the past about unintentionally handing over copyright, say, or even on your email, even on your drive. And I wondered, Sam, about, from your knowledge of, we were talking earlier about museums that have extraordinary data sets. For example, the Victoria and Albert Museum with photographs. There are other examples. What thoughts you might have about, what is the way forward for an institution, to plan, a sensible trust of their own. What if if there was a museum curator now, what would your advice be for them now?
For how to think
how to
about
engage.
the collections they already have.
Yeah.
I mean, I still, this kind of mode that I guess is 10 years ago, which I think Mario benefited from a lot with a lot of his works.
Yeah.
I remember he did a project at the British Library, which using a lot of their data sets as well. And I think I'm all for the model of a Creative Commons or like a public ownership of out of copyright works. I think that maybe there was a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? An imbalance of power or understanding in terms of what the images could actually have been, or how people might use them at the time. But I think in practice it was a good thing. I don't know if I've got any other kind of specific...
No, sure. And I wondered, this might be a good opportunity, as we've got curators in the room and collectors in the room, to open the floor up to questions, perhaps starting, any questions that people have. But this question of, Simon, fire away.
I'm really glad we're talking about the underlying systems.
Yeah.
And I mentioned transductive art earlier, which is to assess these systems based on how they transform an input into an output and what that transformation is. So I think that's where this stuff is most interesting. But I'm very curious about how you guys see the end aesthetic and how to assess that. I don't feel like there's much language to address the unique aesthetics of machine-made art. Everyone's, I think, commented on and presented work that is clearly machine-made, and we see maybe models from Sora, which is like this ultra-realistic, but it's not that interesting. It's stock footage.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious how you guys think about curating, both for that, but also both for the transformative aspect, but for the pure aesthetic of it as well, visual aesthetic.
We don't differ.
There was something that you said in your presentation about why has there not been a masterpiece of AI art, and it just reminded me of back in I think about it a lot, but it's back in 2014 or 15, and I found someone talking about some AI tests of AI music that he was making, and he had these 30-second clips and just describing why they weren't good. And I listened to them and I thought, this is amazing. I could see why he was saying it wasn't good. But for me, it's there's this issue of the fact all of these questions are kind of still down to what we expect art to be. If we're talking about a machinic art or an autonomous art, I want it to be for the machine. I want to know that that these things are seeing something and they see value in it. And at the moment, the value is still all down to how we see the world. And personally, for me, I don't want to sound too controversial, but I'm not as interested in that output. I'm interested in the massive images, but and I'm interested in the system that kind of produces it. All of the kind of the stack, however you call it, the output is it becomes a very personal thing depending on what. I think you described it actually very well. It's someone argues for it, and that helps the the piece that gets minted become the piece that gets minted. It becomes a very personal thing, but it's not about the machine having a vision. But yeah.
There's an interesting point which I'd like to open up, and to answer your point is, it's surely down to the way in which a lot of the dominant models have been assembled, scraping from the internet. We ran an interesting piece last autumn about people who are actively involved in trying to intervene, and Holly Herndon is much involved in this, intervene in what is basically a canonical set of images, which is the sort of stuff that has been on the internet for a long time. Rather bro-ish, rather social media-ish, rather computer-based, rather developer-biased. So the result is, when you put through a mass where you look at these big things like stable diffusion, what they're drawing on is ultimately rather a techie lot of images. And so in other words, the balance is wrong. The balance is what is free and easily available to scrape on the internet. And it's a very, very interesting point, because the result is you get a very sort of white, Western, canonical bias in these models. And that it's very interesting to look at where people have looked to intervene by putting in more diverse imagery that they've created from their community, what the result is. And then do they then become complicit in the whole game by doing so? But I wonder if, because this is a thing that has bothered me a lot, I wondered if, is it that we need new data, new approach to data sets? I just think it's got a long tail and it's going to take a time. And the question is, if you have more, if museums are more engaged, as it were, because interestingly, what Rafika's doing, with his large nature model was natural history museums around the world, phenomenal databases, also oral. If you could get the equivalent from the fine art world, I think you're going to see a change. But it seems to me like it's like a sort of massive, long, it's like a flow in a stream of information that's just got to come through, so that what we see is something more beautiful and sophisticated, please, will come through. And I wondered, if thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's all about engagement, right? I think what Bodo did amazingly well is like creating that interest. You buy a token and you become part of the community, you have a say, you see the result of your say, it's not something abstract. I mean, you might not know exactly who influenced which part of the painting, but I think it's all about intention, right? So where intention goes, energy flows, I always say. So the same with these databases. It's all about engaging the community, making them feel part of it, and that's how you can get the database in creating a new artwork or putting it out there, like Rafik did indeed with nature, because we all have a connection with nature. It's a universal team. With fine art, there's different teams, different periods, different interests. Not everyone even likes the same colors. So you need to find systems, classification systems that engage all people, that can all be interested and have an increased interest in art as a result.
I mean, it's a very big question, because I think I'm not particularly interested myself in just like a formal, analysis of individual works based purely on aesthetics. But the aesthetic dimension is obviously an important part of it, of course. But I do think that the kind of one of many things that makes something a work of art, whether it's like an image or whatever, is the kind of world-building narrative element to it. So I think that is, whether it's art or not, whatever, like art is what you say, sorry, like, it's kind of the context in which it appears, if you like, or the context in which it's made. So much of it is based on context. But I think the narrative and the world that is built around a project is that element, and aesthetics obviously are a component of that. And I think, if we look at histories of art and technology, there is this like sort of peripheral or fringe nature of the experimentation that's been happening with technology for a very long time, and there is still a kind of dominant history, which is like the EAT history. There are obviously lots of other people we could talk about. Rebecca Allen, who I go on about all the time, who I think is a very important and amazing artist who no one knows. So yeah, there are so many things that are the things that are creating meaning, if you like, and engagement. I also want to comment because Catherine's here as well. And a few conversations we've had with Catherine and Natalie Kane at the V&A is also this, you know, I don't work in a collecting institution. We commission and we produce, we think about archiving, but I'm not an expert when it comes to that kind of collecting. And I think there was conversations we've had which are around obviously the difficulties in collecting work that's been made with either proprietary or models, you know, thinking about this in the long term. But then also with that, the fact that there is sort of opacity to how those models are made, whether it's the data set or whatever, which then led us to, you know, talking about cultural memory and how much cultural memory is being created. You know, it's exactly what you're saying in terms of the focus on the data set, but there is a potential, and this is not my thinking, it's what's coming out of the V&A and a few other people, that there is like a whole piece that might be missing from this moment of the kind of the sort of the process and the underlying nature of how these things, certain artworks have been made. Yeah, that is a very roundabout way because I think there's no straightforward answer to the question, and a lot of it is also time. And there are obviously there are a lot of people who've been making work for a long time, and as those works become more established, and I think the role of crypto and collecting and that has done a lot to kind of establish some of that. These things become more into the world.
I mean, I for one have seen some very beautiful AI art, and I'm sure, as anyone here in the room would like to volunteer, you know, beautiful, sophisticated AI art, I'd volunteer Robert Alice's Christie sale recently in New York. I mean, that, you know, there was basically a textual archive he used, and, you know, astonishingly beautiful things. And I just wondered if anyone else wanted to raise questions of, you know, somebody who's gone beyond that dominant aesthetic. It'd be lovely to talk about it. Any other votes for beautiful AI art? Because I've certainly seen some. Certainly, Catherine.
I would just, try and figure out the boundaries of how we understand AI art.
Yes.
One person that I would really put forward here is Su-Wen Chung, and they, as an artist, do not fit this aesthetic that seems to be the conversation that we're having here, which is prompt-based. You know, kind of
maybe
models.
you can explain, which maybe if not everyone knows.
So they're an artist that works with AI and advanced robotics, and I mean there's a series of their works, but they essentially have quite a performative painting practice with iterations of this. It's called DUG, Drawing Operations Unit. Drawing Unit Generation 1, 2, 3. One looked at computer vision, two looked at ideas of memory, and there's different scales, and I know Lugo knows a bit about the practice as well. But it's just different ways that we might think about the presence of AI in art making today, and not only think about it in terms of prompt-based commercial technology.
I would also add to that, like, you don't make video games without AI, and obviously game engines are a really, like, one of the most important technologies in terms of making simulated reality or world building, and you know, AI is a key component. It's also key to the history of how AI is developed, is like video game technology. So there's also that is another example of that.
Right, I think we're out of time now. So
thank
you very much to both works, and thank you for all our speakers.
Thank you to all my amazing speakers and moderators. A big thank you also to Taex and Digital Art Week who partnered with us on this event. And thank you so much. I really feel like we skimmed the surface and there's so much more that we need to unpack. So
we need a drink.
I'm sorry this was quite short, but I really think this is a series that we're going to continue doing over time. So thanks for coming, and hope to see more of you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila.